JD Vance has thrown down the gauntlet to the whole of Europe. In a short and sharp speech, Vance took European leaders to task for failing on the three core principles of any serious country: defending free speech, securing our borders, and upholding democracy. For those of us who've been calling for this for quite some time, this feels like a watershed moment for Europe. Because for so long, European leaders have loved to talk about defending democratic values, but with each passing year, their adherence to these principles has become increasingly superficial. Now, when it comes to free speech, Vance correctly outlined how many European leaders have almost led the world in clamping down on free expression. And the EU, we know, is particularly bad in this regard. The Digital Services Act has provided a pretense for locking users out of discussions on social media, and nations across Europe have followed this lead, passing even stronger laws. It's so bad that across Europe, people have literally been jailed for things they've said online. Newspapers have been shut down for not towing the official line, and conferences and political gatherings have been stormed by the police. Now, freedom of speech is one of the most foundational values in a democratic society, and Vance emphasized how essential it is that we're able to disagree with each other. Without the ability to hear alternative points of view, we've got no chance of fixing the very serious problems that we face. Now, Vance was also extremely critical of the open borders, mass migration obsession that's gripped both Europe and America. And there's been no deviation from what ruling elites seem to regard as a sacred principle. And under their watch, untold numbers of people have entered Europe with barely any pretense of security checks. Under the guise of human rights or refugee conventions, Europe has thrown open its doors to all sorts of people, and the consequences are plain for European citizens to see. And the effects have obviously been especially dire in Germany, which was one of the most eager countries to embrace mass migration. There, a succession of deadly terror attacks has severely threatened the social fabric of Germany, and Vance was completely right to highlight how migration policies have been a disaster for order and people. But perhaps the most important thing that Vance said, more important even than free speech, more important even than securing our borders, was how he spoke plainly about what he called the magic of democracy. Now, these were words that would never have been heard from European leaders, certainly not from Ursula von der Leyen or Emmanuel Macron or Olaf Scholz or any UK leader. JD Vance made a strong and forceful case that democracy is the only durable basis for a stable society. And today, we seem to have something closer to the opposite. Rather than respecting fellow citizens, elites demonize ordinary people for voting the wrong way. Rather than letting people have their voices heard, elites try and control the media. And rather than respecting the results of elections, they're only too happy to cancel, annul, or disrespect the results. In Germany, again, this serves as a tragic example of the dynamic, because in Germany, even to question open border policies has led to such condemnation and the marginalization of large segments of society. They can't maintain this cordon sanitaire against democratic parties indefinitely. Now, Vance's speech was a seminal moment in European political discourse, and it caused a predictable meltdown among European elites. In fact, the whole audience to his speech sat in a kind of stunned silence. Germany's defense minister then took to the stage to berate Vance for daring to criticize German democracy. Olaf Scholz tried to insist that Germany's firewall against democracy was in fact part of dealing with the history of Nazism. And EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas said that Vance was just picking a fight with Europe. They're not listening. Because the speech has to be understood in the context of the recent remarks about Ukraine as well. Because America is undergoing a long overdue reckoning, and so is Europe. Trump's administration has sent a clear message. It's time for Europe to stand up for itself and take control of its own destiny. Now, of course, America wants this shift to be in its favor. They want Europe to carry on buying weapons and increase buying energy from them. But we as Europeans can still take this message to heart. Because for too long, our leaders have seemed as if they're on holiday from history. European nation after European nation has appeared completely lost, completely adrift when it comes to the question of our collective future. Now, whether you're a fan of Donald Trump or if you despise JD Vance is kind of beside the point. The crucial thing we have to recognize is the clarity of this message. And one of the most fundamental elements of Vance's speech was his assertion that real security, genuine security, must begin at home. Because for too long, we've allowed external threats to distract us from the internal decay at the heart of our societies. And Vance was completely correct to remind Europe that without a clear sense of what we're fighting for, it doesn't matter who we're fighting against. Now, this part of his speech drew particular anger from European elites, but it's simply true. There's no chance that Europe will be able to stand up for itself and meet the very real challenges and threats facing us today if we can't even answer the simple question of what do we stand for. Now, it might be uncomfortable for many Europeans, especially those of us who believe in the histories and traditions and sovereignties of our countries, to hear these truths coming from an America. And it really is a shame that this message has had to come from across the Atlantic, but so far very few European leaders have had the clarity or the courage to say what Vance has said. And we should listen, because answering these questions about democracy, about free speech, about securing our borders, and above all, defining what we're fighting for, this has to be a fundamental mission for Europeans. So do make sure to follow our work at MCC Brussels. In the coming weeks and months, we'll be releasing much more on this important topic.